Walking around London or any British city, it's hard to avoid the legacy of empire. Statues of the politicians, generals and traders who built the empire adorn our streets. In 21st century Britain, discussion of the British Empire provokes debate. There are those who see it as a bloody process of war, conquest and slavery, whose scars are all too evident today. Others respond that it was, on balance, a force for good. The Tate Britain in London has organised a major exhibition, Artists and Empire, to examine how the British Empire has influenced the work of artists over the last 400 years. Artists not just from Britain, but from across the former imperial colonies and dominions. Anissa Omar and myself, Chris Banbury, went to review the exhibition for the Islam Channel and to talk to the curator, Alison Smith, and some of the contemporary artists whose works are exhibited there.
This is one of the prize exhibits at the exhibition. It's by a society painter, George Stubbs, famous for painting animals, particularly racehorses. In this instance, he's painted a cheetah which was presented to George III by the governor of Madras. And here it is in Windsor Great Park, been taking part in a stag hunt with its two attendants who'd been brought from India to look after it. Actually, the cheetah ran off, had to be captured, and eventually ended up in a zoo in the Tower of London. But I think what's interesting about this painting is that, one, it already shows a kind of Orientalist attitude towards India in particular. The idea that this is a sort of strange, almost sensual society and a fascination, patronising in part with India. But the second thing is, these two characters are proud. There's no hint here of colonial subjectivity, because this is early on in the British presence in India. And Britain had to recognise, in the 18th century at least, that India was a more developed society in many ways than Britain. And therefore the portrayals of India in this period often show that equality in that. And one of the things that we will see in this exhibition, that as we go through, the portrayal of India and the British Empire will change as colonialism comes in, slavery is already in existence, and the portrayals will change as well from these proud gentlemen here, come from India to Britain, showing no signs of meekness or subjugation, how that changes in the course of this exhibition. This painting provides an interesting contrast to the earlier one by George Stubbs, the one of the cheetah being presented to the King George III. Here, Britannia is slaying the tiger. And the year of the painting is interesting as well, 1858, the year after what the British called the Indian Mutiny, which of course is today regarded in India as being an uprising for national liberation. The painting's title is Retribution. This is imperial retribution for that uprising in 1857 in India. And also interesting, this painting was for public display in Leeds Town Hall. In other words, it was for popular viewing for the British public, showing the might of the empire, delivering this retribution on unruly subjects. It speaks volumes about Britain's relationship with India, which have come a long way from that 1744 painting by George Stubbs of the leopard in Great Windsor Park to this, where really the savage beast responsible for death, rape and worse of British subjects in India has to be punished and pay the ultimate sacrifice.
Alison Smith from Tate Britain is one of the curators of the exhibition with a long interest in Victorian art. The painting she chose to be filmed in front of is George William Joy's 1893 depiction of the death of General Gordon in Khartoum, Sudan, 8 years before.
Alison, as the curator of this exhibition, to begin our interview, we decided to be in front of this painting, The Death of General Gordon. Who was General Gordon?
General Gordon was one of the great Victorian heroes, and he's immortalised here in this painting by George Joy, which represents his last moments outside the council chamber in Khartoum. Gordon was sent by the British government to evacuate the garrison at Khartoum, the Anglo-Egyptian population there. Instead of evacuating, he decided to defend the town and the citizens against attack by the Mahdiist forces. The Mahdi was a religious leader who led a jihad against the Anglo-Egyptian administration in the area. And in defending the town, Gordon found himself surrounded and isolated, and he kept writing back to the British in Cairo and in London.
And was this a unique uprising, would you say? And this painting in itself unique?
The uprising was part of a wider movement, the rise of political Islam in North Africa. The painting became quite famous because it iconicized the moment of Gordon's death. Gordon, as he walked out of the council chamber in the morning on the 26th of January, he was speared down and cut to pieces. And when the news was relayed back to Britain via the telegraph, the whole nation was in grief. And as a memorial to him, Joy painted this picture.
And does this emphasise the greatness of the empire in regards to the many nationalities that were involved?
I think the idea you're supposed to come away with is of Gordon's composure and dignity at this moment of crisis and impending death. So the contrast is drawn between him high up in the composition, looking down with calm disdain at this mob of dervishes who will surge up to him from below.
And do you think to some degree it's sort of justifying the empire in regards to having someone who's in effect a colonial administrator
people like Gordon,
helping
represent the civilising mission of empire, and this rabble here, they're in need of this discipline and authority and the Bible. He was a great proselytiser of the Bible as well.
And would you, adding on to that, you think art of the empire in general is a justifying implication of the empire?
Art made at this particular time was made to justify and promote and to explain why the empire had grown the way it had, and how it was there to defend all different peoples around the world. Looking at it today with hindsight, we'd regard it as a piece of imperialistic propaganda, and in fact the reputation of this work took a down curve in the 20th century after the collapse of empire after the Second World War. This type of painting,
it was at the peak of the economic prosperity of the empire, and this art reflects that, would you say?
It reflects the confidence, but also the threat to empire at its very edges.
And who were these paintings for? Were they
These paintings were for the British public. They were shown at public exhibition. Then this one was copied and popularised through a wax tableau at Madame Tussauds Museum in London.
So would you say that such art is one gaze of the empire and doesn't necessarily reflect the true experiences of those subjugated, the millions across the world, from India to New Zealand to across West
It's one particular viewpoint. It's the viewpoint of the artist who was himself an imperial romantic like Gordon. But there are other ways one could approach this subject, and this, the whole question of Gordon's role in the Sudan in the defence of Khartoum. Was he genuine? Was he an imposter? That's all been debated since. But a painting like this, which is so static, it's frozen, it represents one particular scene, opens up these questions for us to answer.
So that's an important reason for the art. Would you say that there is another reason in terms of archiving and preserving history that would otherwise be lost?
With history painting, the artist tended to focus on certain moments which became emblematic of empire, and paintings such as the death of General Gordon have illustrated history books over the years. And it's through these paintings, the First Afghan War, the death of Gordon, The Last Stand at Isandlwana, all these pictures have been used to illustrate children's popular history and led to understanding of empire.
As we know, history is usually of the victor. So would you argue that, as I was alluding to earlier, that these paintings are a reflection of the victors and rather not the experiences of those that were subjugated under the empire, and in effect we're missing that narrative.
This is definitely Victor's history, but it also sort of shows cracks and vulnerabilities in the imperial position. But also because they are objects and we can come to museums and look at them, we can bring different viewpoints to bear on them. So this is an art which would not, say, reflect viewpoints of other sort of, cultures and races, but they can have, there's the opportunity to respond. And I think art always allows
Debate.
It opens up debate.
So these three paintings, which were commissioned by Queen Victoria in 1886 under her British Empire, were created to give a more individualistic look to her subjects. However, given the fact that Queen Victoria was the Empress of India and had Indian subjects and was the head of an empire, how far can art bring equality to the subjects of the empire?
Andrew Gilbert is a Scottish artist now based in Berlin. His interest in empire began in childhood with a visit to the battlefield of Culloden, where, in 1746, a British army brutally crushed a rebel army made up in the main of Highland Scots.
Andrew, could you tell us what's going on here with this tableau?
It represents British infantry advancing to Ulundi, which was the Zulu capital, which was destroyed and burnt down on the 4th of July 1879, the end of the Zulu War after the British invasion of Zululand. But here represented the British more as primitive idols, as if they might be on display in a fictional Zulu ethnographic museum or a military museum.
So this is how the Zulus might have envisaged the British, and it's turning around that kind of almost Orientalist sort of view of imperial subject and turning the tables on it.
I mean, the British already, or the Europeans already have the often fur and the black watch of the fur and the
kilt.
Exactly.
And I notice on the flag, one of the battle honours is Culloden, which is, as a Scot, is quite interesting.
Yeah, I was just going back to there were obviously loyalist or loyal regiments, loyal clans, but also loyal regiments who fought the Battle of Culloden. I think there were more Scots on the side of the government, Lowland Scots and Campbells and so on, than there were on the side of Bonnie Prince Charlie's army. So yeah, but it's I visited the battlefield as a child quite often, and it reminded me of the Zulu War a lot as a child. So I made this weird connection between the two.
And is this do you think is this a sort of a critique in the current world of what British foreign policy is in the light of the 2003 invasion of Iraq and so on?
Definitely a lot of similarities and also motives for invasions, where we have this idea of these words like democracy, bringing democracy or liberation, but everyone knows that it's like in the 19th century, it's about resources and control of land. It has nothing to do with bringing democracy to the people of Iraq or something like this. It was about oil, it's pretty obvious. Just like the Zulu War, there was similarities where the Zulus had no chance for peace negotiations. The terms offered to them were impossible to accept. They would have to disband their army and destroy their whole structure of society, and there was no way they would ever be able to agree to these terms, so they were invaded. And like Iraq, it was turned into civil war. Leaders put in charge who didn't represent people or different ethnic groups or different tribes, and it all ended up in civil war and disaster for the Zulu.
So this painting was created in 1815 by Thomas Jones Barker, The Secret of England's Greatest Empire. It reflects the anecdotes that the empire was given by religion, the fact that the Queen Victoria is holding the Bible and giving it to an African prince, and the fact that this reflects largely in terms of religion giving colonies freedom, and in effect it's legitimising the empire through religion.
Another contemporary take on empire and its legacy is Twins by the Singh Twins. Amrit Kaur Singh and Rabinda Kaur Singh, two Sikh artists based in Liverpool who've achieved an international standing.
So here we have the Singh Twins and their painting Entwined. Can you tell me a little bit about the painting and why you painted it?
Well, it was commissioned by the Museums of London, and they asked us as contemporary artists to respond to a particular work in their collections, which is by Victorian artist Henry O'Neill, which happens to be in the Tate exhibition as well. And it's a painting that depicted the homecoming of Indian troops from India after fighting what the Victorians called the Indian Mutiny. And the museum wanted us to look at that theme from, as I say, a modern perspective, and particularly an Indian perspective. My sister and I both come from a British Indian heritage, and we're known for our works which explore issues around identity and colonialism and empire, and so it's the kind of thing that we were very keen to explore with this particular work.
And you say a modern take, so I see there's lots of depictions of magazines and other very modern takes. Would you describe that as, I would say, very unique and a way of perhaps bringing in new audiences to understand the empire?
Well, I think what our work tries to do generally to engage with modern audiences is to show the connections between past and present day. And the mutiny is obviously, there's lots of legacies to the mutiny that have an impact on us today. So, for example, the fact that the British were in India led to the partition of India in 1947, which in turn led to waves of Indian immigrants coming to settle in UK from that time on to the present day. And that's represented to a certain extent with the figures coming from the ship, because amongst them is our own grandmother and our father, who actually landed in the same dock that's depicted in the original O'Neill paintings that came because of the partition of India and the turmoil that was happening at the time. And leading on from that, there are other figures around the border of the composition which show how Asian life, the Asian community rather, has had a positive impact on British culture and identity generally, whether it be through sports or media, through commerce. Well, it does show a positive side to the legacies of empire, but it also shows the darker side of empire too, because going back to what this painting was intending to do was to put the historical context of the mutiny within an Indian viewpoint. And so, you see all these Victorian paintings of the glorious troops coming back from India, celebrating victory in India, but you very rarely see the other side of, why did that rebellion happen in the first place? And for the Indians, it was seen as a first sort of revolutionary move to oust the British from India itself. And elements of that are represented in the painting, the reasons for that. We have images here from the Victorian Punch magazine, for example, which were all about exposing the brutality of British rule in India, and things like this hedge, which you follow it through into a map of India here in the border, which was something that was physically built across the regions of India to gain taxes from Indians. And it caused all sorts of hardships and poverty, starvation, famine. So the painting is also about, say, the negative sides of empire, the way in which histories are written from a European perspective. So there are elements within the painting that show what we would call hidden histories of empire. This figure here, for example, is Princess Sophia Dalip Singh, and she was the granddaughter of the Sikh ruler of Punjab. Now, her kingdoms were annexed to the British rule, again, as a result of British domination in India itself.
History is always done by the victor.
Yes,
so
of course.
This is a wonderful take in terms of looking at from who were the subjects of the empire and who, in effect, yourselves have become in terms of migrating to the UK.
Exactly.
So what is it that art does in terms of not only depicting history, but would you say it's a way of owning history?
I think it is. I mean, we've always felt that art is probably one of the most powerful tools of communication that we have. It's something that can be very eclectic. I mean, this artwork borrows from all sorts of histories, cultures, even art forms. It combines the traditional Indian-esque miniature style, which we're known for, with various elements of European painting and also things like photography. It's also a very accessible means of bringing different debates to an audience as well.
So that's why it's in the Tate. It's more of it's very modern, but also, as you said, accessible take on take on the empire and at the same time educational.
It is, but it also brings together a lot of what this show is about, I think. As I say, we talked about legacies of empire, the brutality of empire, issues around how do we redefine empire today. You know, retrospectively, we view it in a very different way to the way in which it's depicted through many of the objects in this particular exhibition. Also issues of shared heritage and identities because of empire.
Artists and Empire runs at the Tate Britain until 10th April 2016. It's well worth a visit, and it's likely to further the debate on the record of British imperial rule and its legacy today.